All right, let's dive right in. Today, we are getting into the nitty-gritty of a fascinating legal question. What's the real difference between culpable homicide and murder? They sound similar, but in the eyes of the law, they are worlds apart.
So, what is the real legal difference between killing someone and murdering them? I mean, both are illegal and both result in someone's death, but the distinction is absolutely critical. It can be the difference between a long prison sentence and the death penalty. We're talking about a legal line that has life-or-death consequences. To really get a handle on this, we're going to do something a little different. We're going to follow a prosecutor's playbook. We're going to build a case for an unlawful killing from the ground up, step by step, and see exactly where that path splits into two.
You see, every single homicide case, no matter how complicated it seems on TV, really just rests on these three pillars. 1. You have to prove someone is actually dead. 2. You have to prove the accused is connected to that death. And 3. This is the big one. You have to prove their mental state. That third step, that's where the entire case turns.
Okay, so those first two steps are, relatively straightforward. The prosecution has to show the victim is dead, usually with a body, but sometimes strong evidence is enough. And then they have to draw a direct line, a link from the accused actions to that person's death.
That link has a name, the causal connection. It has to be an unbreakable chain. For example, let's say I seriously injure someone, but on the way to the hospital, the ambulance they're in gets into a completely separate fatal car crash. Is their death my fault? Legally, no. The car crash broke that chain of causation. My act wasn't the direct cause anymore.
Okay, so once you've got a dead body and a clear link, you get to the absolute heart of the matter, mens rea. It's Latin for the guilty mind, and it's all about one question. What was going on in the accused's head when they committed the act? This single element is what separates culpable homicide from murder.
To really see this in action, let's look at a couple of scenarios. First up, two people get into a heated argument. One of them grabs a sword and gives the other a single, deep slash to the thigh. The victim ends up bleeding out and dying. Now, the attacker definitely intended to cause a serious injury, right?
Now, let's switch it up. In this scenario, an attacker stabs someone in the gut with a knife, a vital area, and then twists it, causing just massive internal damage. The victim dies. Again, the intent to cause serious harm is obvious. So how on earth does the law tell these two horrible acts apart? Well, here's the secret. It's not just about what the attacker did. The prosecution can only prove the injury was intentional. To figure out how legally serious that injury was, the court needs an expert. And this is where the doctor's medical opinion becomes absolutely critical. It turns a subjective, violent act into an objective, cold, hard legal fact.
And this table right here, this is the aha moment. Look at this. In scenario 1, with the thigh wound, the doctor says the injury is likely to cause death. It's bad, it's probably fatal, but someone might survive. But in scenario 2, the doctor says the twisted stab wound is sufficient in the ordinary course of nature to cause death. That means pretty much anybody who gets that injury is going to die. That tiny change in wording, from likely to sufficient, that's the legal firewall. That's what separates culpable homicide from murder. And this idea of degrees applies to what the person knew, too. For culpable homicide, it's enough if you just knew your act was likely to cause death. But for murder, the bar is way, way higher. The act has to be so obviously and imminently dangerous that you would have to know it must, in all probability, cause death. This classic example really drives the point home. A snake charmer thinks it'll be funny to put a live venomous cobra on someone's neck. He's not trying to kill them, it's just a horrible, stupid joke. But of course, the cobra bites and the person dies. The law calls this murder. Why? Because the act is so incredibly reckless, so imminently dangerous that death is almost a guarantee. The knowledge of that near certainty is enough to qualify as a guilty mind for murder.
Okay, so we've established this really high standard for what counts as murder. But what if a case clearly meets that standard, but the person still doesn't get convicted of murder? Well, this is where the law gets really, really interesting.
You see, the law has these things called special exceptions. Think of them as escape hatches. They're specific situations where, even though an act looks exactly like murder, the law kind of takes a step back. It acknowledges human weakness and reduces the charge. And the most famous one is grave and sudden provocation.
And here is the textbook example, the one you've probably seen in movies a dozen times. A person comes home, finds their spouse cheating on them, and in that instant, just completely loses it. They snap, and in a fit of rage, kill the other person. Now, the law isn't saying it's okay, not at all, but it does recognize that in that moment, the killer was provoked in a way that was so severe, so sudden, that they lost their power of self-control.
So here's how it plays out in court. The prosecution goes first and proves their case for murder. And they're right, the act fits the definition perfectly. But then, the defense gets to play their card. They argue for the special exception. And if they succeed, that exception hits back against the murder charge, knocking it down to the lesser offense of culpable homicide. It's a fascinating legal maneuver. Now for our final concept, and this one is a real mind-bender. We've talked about intent, we've talked about knowledge, we've talked about provocation. But what happens if a person has the crystal clear intent to murder someone, but they're a terrible shot? This situation is covered by a legal doctrine called transfer of malice, and the idea behind it is actually pretty simple, but really powerful. The law basically says that your guilty mind, your intent to kill, it follows the bullet. It doesn't just disappear into thin air because you missed.
Let's just walk through it. Person A wants to murder person B. Aims the gun, pulls the trigger. But at the very last second, B ducks. The bullet flies past and hits person C, a complete stranger, killing them instantly. So what happens to A? Well, in the eyes of the law, A's intent to murder B is simply transferred over to C. A is guilty of murdering C, even though they never meant to hurt them at all. Here's another fun example. You might even recognize it from a famous movie. Person A poisons a cup of tea, intending for B to drink it and die. But B says, "Nah, I'm not a tea drinker," and kindly offers the cup to his friend C. C drinks the tea and dies. It's the exact same principle. A's murderous intent gets transferred from B to C. And the legal consequences here are huge. A doesn't just get a slap on the wrist for being a clumsy killer. No way. A is charged with the full murder of C, the person who actually died. But that's not all. A is also charged with the attempted murder of B, the original target. The law holds A accountable for both crimes. Whew! Okay, we have covered a lot of ground here, from the basic building blocks of a case all the way to some really complex legal twists. So let's take a breath and recap the biggest takeaways. First, just remember it's all a three-step process. You need a death, a connection, and a mindset. Second, that mindset is everything. That subtle difference between knowing something is likely to cause death versus sufficient to cause death changes the entire crime. Third, don't forget the doctors. Their expert opinion is often the deciding factor. And finally, remember that intent can be transferred. A guilty mind follows the weapon, even if it misses the target. So I'll leave you with this final thought to chew on. When it comes to the most serious crimes, what does the law really care about more? The tragic outcome of an act, or the degree of certainty about that outcome that existed in the mind of the person who did it? It's a fascinating question. Thanks for tuning in.